A good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is Nerds the Human, and welcome to this, a special Games Guide edition of Rome Total War, where today we're looking at
Triarii!
And our focus is on two things here. Number one, we want to have the Triarii in a phalanx formation, and two, we want them available after the Marian reforms. Why are we doing this, you may ask? Well, of course, Triarii are one of the units you use in the very first prologue battle, and I think ever since that seminal moment in my Total War experience, I've loved these guys. Absolute brick wall against those cavalry there. I mean, now I know they are 8 experienced, but even so, there was something beautiful about this unit. Now, of course, the Roman unit roster is incredibly strong, but if you can add Triarii into your post-Marian army, oh, that really does plug a hole, because usually you're having to fill it out with the odd mercenary hoplite unit. And whilst they are perfectly fine, it's nice to have a good go-to lad here ready to use whenever you want him. I should state though that this isn't meant as a fix at all. Of course, the Triarii are a very strong unit. What this is more though is mucking around with the game files, and I know a number of people have been asking for this particular video. So this one's here for you. Let's head into the game files. To make the changes we want, we need to head inside Rome Total War and into the data subfolder. From here, we're going to scroll most of the way down to export_desca_unit. Once inside the file, you'll find information about every unit in the game, and we're not really going to go in full depth into this today. What I want to do really is just focus on the phalanx and of course how we can make them playable after the Marian reforms. But there is a long description here at the top in case you want to know more about this file. I will be doing some more videos on this as well anyway, so we'll follow up with more in the future, but for now let's just go and focus on Triarii. So down to Triarii, I'll just use the find function for that. Here are the Roman Triarii. They are infantry spearmen, as we well know. The important part that we need to look at is this line here, the formation. Now, at the moment, we don't have phalanx written in here, and as a general rule, it's a good idea to look elsewhere in the file to make sure you get your formatting right. So, if we, for example, let's go to the Spartan hoplites. There we are. Of course, they are a phalanx unit. So you can see there, they've got square and phalanx. So if we want to go and copy that, we can simply go and bring that back up towards Triarii. It is honestly as simple as that, to simply add a phalanx onto the Triarii. So we can open the game now. I can show you it in battle. Here we are then, straight onto the battlefield with a beautiful Phalanx Triarii unit here, looking resplendent in the morning sun. We can go send them forwards to go and take on these Libyan spearmen. As any phalanxes, they're a little bit wonky when it comes to marching. Quite why they're going that direction, I don't know. But, you know, pathfinding around the watchtower perhaps is going a bit strange. Anyway, we'll send them in to go and take on those Libyan spearmen, who, of course, they should be able to beat pretty darn solidly, especially as these are not phalanxed units. Now, of course, we can go and change around all sorts of units with this, and I will go and bring us into looking at some other units in a minute. But before we do that, of course, let's have a quick look at how they're doing. By and large, they are holding position a bit on the thin side, this phalanx. They are getting knocked back a bit by what is a pretty solid unit, but they are chunking them down fairly effectively. You can, of course, just take them out of phalanx if you like and just send them after them in usual fashion. Do seem to like running with their spears at this point, which is kind of amusing. So you end up with a bit of a running phalanx as well. I won't pretend it's a perfect fix in some ways. They're not really supposed to have phalanxes, but certainly it does work, and they're a much more effective unit as a result. With the phalanx added then, there's another thing we want to change, which is to make sure we can still use these guys post-Marian reforms. So what I'd like us to do is to go and have a look at a different file, which is also in the same place in the data subfolder of Rome Total War. Now what we want this time is this file here, export_desca_buildings. Inside this file we find out about all the different kinds of buildings in the game, and indeed our focus today is on what they can recruit. And if you want to know more about this file, I do have another video where we look in a lot more detail at this, so I'll put a link in the description below. But for now, we're just interested in finding the Triarii. So if we head down to them, you can see they are eventually listed here in the files, and they are listed here under the army barracks. So you can see here, this is just a long list of all the different barracks, starting with, well, the lowest level, the basic barracks, the muster fields, etc., and going down through the militia barracks, the level 2, the level 3 city barracks, and what we're looking at here, the level 4 army barracks. Now, we can see on this list that we have the Triarii. Now, the difference with most factions is that they don't have all these Marian Reform comments here on the end. Now, of course, at the moment, this says here that you can recruit Triarii from this particular barracks when you're Roman and not after the Marian Reforms. Quite simply, you can just take that out, because you'll notice here for most of the factions, it doesn't have any of that extra clause in there at all. It's very simple. Most units are just a simple case of build this building, and now you can get this particular unit. There's a few exceptions, like the Spartan hoplites, for example, which I'm trying to fiddle around with at the moment, which is why Termon's in there. We'll come back to that on another day, ladies and gents. But for now, we're just going to focus on the Triarii. And if we go and take out the Marian Reforms here, then it doesn't have that requirement anymore. We can have it both pre and post Marian Reform. So again, if you want to fiddle around with other units, you are absolutely welcome to do so. We're just using the example of the Triarii here. So quite simply, I've changed that round. I'm going to save it up, and then we'll reload the game. Actually, before we load the game, a very quick point that, of course, there is one higher level of barracks, the Royal Barracks. Normally, by the time you could build this, the Triarii would become redundant, and of course, you wouldn't be able to hire them. But if we're going to make them available post-Marian, we do need to make sure that they are available on here as well. So further down here are the Roman Triarii. Once again, we'll just remove that particular line there. Otherwise, you'll be able to get it at level 4 barracks, but not the level 5 barracks, which is a little bit silly. This comes now with 1 experience as well, which is always welcome. Now we'll save it up, and now it'll work at both level 4 and level 5 barracks. Here we are then back inside the game that we looked at the very start of the video. It's just a background screen, but on this occasion we can now see that it is a Phalanx Triarii, which is marvellous. Any changes you make will be able to affect any save file. Okay, so these are dynamic changes that we're making to the game. Now, of course, what we need to do also is check that it works now post-Marian. So what I've got here is a bit of a case study in Mediolanum. Now, of course, the way that we get the Marian Reforms to happen is one of these cities here in Italy will turn into a huge city. So we're going to add some population into the city here, just to kind of force it over the line. We can see now that we are over 24,000, well over in fact. Once the Imperial Palace is built, we'll be able to actually get the Marian Reforms in place and check our little experiments here. So Mediolanum, could have picked a town with a less wonky long name. There we are. So construction is now complete. And the game probably hasn't quite processed the reforms yet, so we'll just give it an end turn. There's a dead spy. And with that, oh, people got kicked out. I was in Rhodes apparently. Strange old game I wasn't paying any attention to. Right, ignoring all of that issue, we now should have, there we are, the Gaius Marius Reforms. Beautiful. So we're now going to have new recruitment. We're going to take back Rhodes. Whatever. And this is very unhappy now because we just shoved an extra 12,000 people in. So we can see here, there we go. We've got ourselves our post-Marian units, such as our Legionary Cohort, but the Triarii with the Phalanx are still there. That's lovely. This is quite a nice way of doing this. I might do this even without the Phalanx, actually just have the Triarii late again, because of course these auxilia are just not really as good, are they? Now, of course, their stats, when you look at them, aren't much different here, but when you look in more depth at their stats, certainly things like the morale is a big noticeable difference, although these guys do have good stamina. Even so, they're not quite as good, are they? And they also don't have the marvellous Triarii call, which we all know and love.
Triarii!
I think I'm much happier with this result. But before we leave it here today, ladies and gents, because clearly the Triarii is a big success here, I want to just play around with the Phalanx a little bit more. Which other units can we get into a Phalanx formation, and how far can we push it? Of course, when we add a Phalanx onto an infantry unit that's already spearmen, it makes sense that it works completely fine. But of course, there is a little bit more that we could test this on. We could test it on other types of infantry, for example, and a bit more after that. Although, yeah, I'm just going to say now, not all of this is going to work, but we'll have a little play around anyway. So we have ourselves the Phalanx here. In case you're interested in the Triarii and the Auxilia as a comparison, by the way, there's some interesting little changes. One of the main ones is this here. The morale is 10, which is normally at 12, by the way, so 10's pretty darn strong. Only 6 for the Auxilia. However, one thing I have noticed is that in a forest, the auxiliary get a big bonus of +3, whereas the Triarii don't get anything at all. I suppose that represents that these are more drafts from around the Riverlands on the border with the German tribes. So I guess that makes some kind of sense, but they are slightly different units, obviously, but that is something that I never really noticed before I was looking at this here today. Anyway, let's go grab the Phalanx line here. We're going to go add it to a few different types of units. Now, number one, we're going to add it to Hastati over here. They're interesting because first, they're not spearmen, they are swordsmen. But they also, of course, have themselves the pilum, which, by the way, any missile weapon will always come as the primary weapon on here. So they're swordsmen with an extra weapon of the pilum as well. So that does change how this runs. What else could we add it to? We could add it to some basic lads. Who should we give it to? Let's just give it to some basic peasants. There we are, Roman peasants. So they normally have the horde, but they can also now phalanx. That is marvellous. And there are a few other things we could try here. So let's add it on to the archers. Why not? See how that goes. And yeah, we'll leave it at that for now because the rest is a little bit different. So let's save that up. Let's see how this runs. And here we are, the peasants with a phalanx. It is a bit of a messy phalanx and a wide one at that. We can tighten up the formation in the files. Perhaps we'll dip into that afterwards. But yes, we're in a phalanx. They've got no shield. They're kind of holding their arms like a shield arm here. I actually, recently, I'm a primary school teacher, by the way. We recently did a little bit of ancient history. And I did get my children to form a phalanx. They didn't have shields, so they were just told to hold their arm like that, as if they had a shield themselves. Marvellous stuff. Yeah, they're likewise doing the same thing that we saw before with the Triarii, where they're reshuffling over. But we can see their information. It'll probably go wrong. This guy is stabbing Steve in the rear end there, but it's fine. They're not very well trained, and of course they are only one attack and one defence, so they're not going to do all that hot. But with any luck, they'll be okay. So we'll see them get set up here. Of course, you don't really need much defence if you can hold them at arm's length anyway, which is kind of the idea here with the phalanx. The warband don't quite know what to do, so I guess we'll charge into them instead, which may or may not go wrong. There we go. Formation's not quite as wide as theirs, so that might cause us some problems. But there we are, peasant phalanx. This is quite a straightforward one, of course. These are basic infantry, no secondary weapons, so these little buttons here aren't getting confused by having too many different options. We'll come to that issue in a minute. With the peasants, it's quite straightforward. They have one weapon, and it's this long, pokey spear of death. What happens with the swords? They will get the daggers out potentially, do they? That's the interesting thing. I'm not actually seeing any daggers, so they seem to have replaced their daggers completely with the long pikes of doom. That is interesting. So you might find when they get broken up more, they're just going to continue with the pikes, which probably works to their advantage in a weird kind of way. Well, they're doing okay. They've lost the general. Let's speed it up and see how it goes. We've got a couple more units to test. A beautiful speech there for our brand new Hastati in full sort of not actually phalanx formation. And yes, you'll notice they're not in phalanxes, but they do exist. It's just they've got to pull them out of somewhere in a minute or two. So let's just get them forward and we'll try and figure out exactly what's going on here. Because, yeah, they do have phalanxes, but what's happening is the game's getting a bit confused. You can see here they're doing the same walk that I told them last time. I'm telling them to run, but it's not happening because they're in phalanx. So we're going to tell them to come over here. The issue is they think they're in phalanx, but they haven't got their spears out. They're a bit new to this whole business, so they're a little bit muddled, more so than the Triarii. I'm not quite sure why you'd want to give Hastati a phalanx, but, you know, if you want to, I suppose this is a very scruffy way of doing it. So as they start to come in, we can put ourselves on missile mode, because one of the weird things that's happening is that we should have a missile first and foremost, and that's what's confusing the game here. As we go to throw our javelins in, you'll notice a very strange phenomenon happen. Here come the spears! And yeah, the pikes aren't there. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Go into pike mode, please. Go into pikes, and at some point you might find they actually manage to pull out the pikes, but there's a good chance they get stuck on their swords because all sorts of, yeah. There we go. There are the spikes. Now, I'm not quite sure They're now holding them over their shoulders. Yeah, this works better for some units than others, suffice to say. And a very quick victory once we finally do get the spears out. But over the shoulder, no, not perhaps the most effective way of holding spear. It doesn't give you an awful lot of manoeuvrability and options with your thrusting. But hey-ho, we'll now throw in, shall we? Might as well go and do that. Are we going to lob them in? No, we're not. We're very, very confused. I think you have to be off phalanx to throw them amusingly. So yeah, Hastati, it works, sort of. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And we are then with the archers. You can see they've got their pikes out already. They look a bit like the peasants, to be honest. Quite well spaced out. The weird thing is here, now we're a missile unit. We don't have the option of phalanx. We're just kind of in phalanx. So with these guys, it seems to have just replaced their actual their stabby weapon. Their dagger, that's what the word is, Thomas. Well done, their stabby thing. I'm an excellent teacher, as I'm sure you can imagine. So we are now stuck being unable to run. And I'm not sure if we start playing around with this stuff, can we start running any time? It doesn't look like it. So apparently we're stuck not being able to run. And skirmish mode is probably not a best friend either. So we should probably turn around and face the Iberian infantry here. Okay. Oh, crash. We're going to give our archers a second try, ladies and gents. I think they deserve that much, don't you? Obviously, they are a bit like the old peasants, but a slightly better set of stats, 3 and 2, rather than 1 and 1. You might be wondering if they can actually shoot. Yeah, perhaps we should go and find that out. Maybe we will momentarily. This time we're taking on the Judean zealots, which is rather marvellous. So can we shoot? Let's try and shoot them. Where are you going to put your spikes? Presumably in the ground. Any shots coming in? No? Says you shoot him. This isn't looking encouraging. Now, if you do this with the Vetelais, they will throw their javelins just like the Hastati threw their pilum. But, yeah, it doesn't look like they're doing an awful lot of shooting with their arrows, does it? Not looking encouraging. Maybe we need to play around without the guard mode. Is that the problem? No. Yeah, I mean, this works better with some units than others, suffice to say. At the very least, we can get them into battle against these chaps. They are, I mean, a bit like the desert infantry, aren't they? The Judean zealots. Good morale, good stamina. They look okay. Let's charge into them then. Let's charge into them and see what the Roman chaps can do. They don't know how to fan it, and it's broken. Suffice to say, this works better with some units than others, and certainly for the Triarii, it is quite straightforward. They are infantry spearmen, and because they only have that one primary weapon, nothing on the secondary over here, that does mean that it certainly makes the game run a lot more smoothly. I've had absolutely no breaks, no crashes with Triarii at all. It's when you start adding it on to units like the archers. The archers aren't great. You can try and add it to cavalry, it will break the game, it won't even load, don't even bother, it's not worth it. By far and large, it's best to keep it to simple infantry, like the peasants, like the Triarii. I mean, as I say, it's kind of just about worked with the Hastati, but not really worth it. The other interesting one you might think are the handler category, so people like the war dogs or the pigs. The game will load, it's just nothing will really change. Unfortunately, they won't just get their knife out and turn it into a long pike. I suppose if you change around the primary weapon here from knife to pike, then it probably would start working, but hey-ho, that's probably more than we really need to be dealing with. We don't need phalanx war dogs. Or do we? The final thing I said I'd mention then is how to tighten up the formations. Of course, with the Roman peasants, they're a little bit loose. So that is represented here by these numbers, 1.2 and 1.8. Most units, most hoplites, for example, would be 1 and 1. So we're just going to lower this down a little bit. Now, I have found this is a bit fiddly at times, and sometimes the game doesn't like the changes. So I'm just going to lower these down by 0.2 each. And then obviously, because these are twice as big, these are the loose formation version. We're just going to change it down by 0.4 on this occasion, so they can both be changed to 2. We should now have a much tighter peasant formation. back on the battlefield one final time then, ladies and gentlemen, and I think it's time to leave it here today. You can see the peasants are a little bit tighter than they were before. I'm sure they'll be just as effective cutting down the Flouxmen there. And there we've obviously got our Triarii over here, the real heroes of the day. Some of you have been asking for this for quite a long time, so I hope this satisfies your urges for a demonic Triarii unit, although the peasants seem to be holding their own pretty well anyway. So I will leave you for now. However, I will just point out there will be a few more of these videos on Rome Total War guides coming up very soon indeed. We'll be looking at Testudo, looking at some of the other little details like the morale and the stamina and all that kind of good nonsense. But as I say, that will come very soon. Now, most of this I'm hoping will work for Remastered. As far as I'm aware, it's supposed to be running on the same old files. So if any luck, all of this I've shown you here today will work on the new Remastered. But I suppose we'll see about that in the near future. When it comes out, if things are particularly different, I will make some new guides then. If these are still appropriate, well then brilliant. Marvellous for us all. It is supposed to be very similar indeed. But for now, I will leave you. I'm Thomas, this is Nerds the Human, and this has been a games guide to giving phalanxes over to the Triarii. Thank you, and goodbye.
Go, my pappies, go! Hunt down the German dogs.
My chariots are complete lunatics. Stop charging into the spears. Stop charging into the spears. Why do these guys not break? Everyone else has fled. Go home. Go home. What is happening at the chariots?